The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Christina Furtado, and I'm your presenter for today. We are scheduled to start in the next 5 minutes, so I just ask for people's patience while we await for other attendees to join the room. Thank you very much. See you soon. Hello, everyone, and welcome. So we are right now looking at getting ourselves started. So what I want to do before we actually get into is just testing out some audio and making sure that everyone can sort of hear. So if you are unable to hear on your end of things, do check your internal devices that you're using with regards to the volume of your computers. If you are calling from a phone, then there is an audio code that was attached to your registration. So let's hope that we can fix that on your end. I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to figure that out, and then we'll look at providing you with additional information if required. So I'm not sure as to why it's not working, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. There seemed to have been an error earlier this week as well with this particular platform and audio. So I am just in the process of messaging within the chat feature on your control panel. Yes, there is. Thank you everyone for piping up that whether volume is clear or not. Thank you. That does help. My sincerest apologies. We are trying to figure it out. If you can hear me, then that has been attributed to using computer audio versus the audio on your phone. So we're trying to definitely work that out on the back end of things. So my sincerest apologies. But if you can hear me, do please sort of raise your hand and we'll try to figure it out, which I do see that some are raising their hands. Alexander, I've unmuted you. What's the problem?
Hi, yeah, it was just to say that I hear you.
You hear me. Thank you so very much for letting me know that. We're trying to figure it out. So everybody's patience is definitely welcomed at this time. So we'll try to get this going as soon as we can. Thanks again. Althea, your hand was up. Is everything okay? You can hear okay? No, no, I can't hear. Okay, no. Oh boy. So living in the day of technology. Yes, Angela? I can hear, thank you. So if you are using, again, your phone audio or rather than the computer audio, you apparently are going to have difficulty as you didn't enter in the code. So I'm mindful of people's time as well. And while unfortunately with technical issues, it does make it a bit more challenging to try to navigate everybody's concerns. So for those that can't access, because that seems to be an error of concern as well. Now, again, given sort of networks being struggled and really stretched thin right now, recordings are going to be available. So there was a suggestion made of exiting and trying it again. So I am going to get started with all due respect to everyone that is having difficulty. I do have a colleague in the background that's also trying to navigate a solution. So we will try our best to get everyone sorted during this particular time. So out of respect for our Canadian history and culture, it is customary to offer a land acknowledgement. So today we gather in this special place to continue our learning journey together. We take a moment to recognize that today's presentation is being held on the traditional and unceded territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge and pay tribute to all Aboriginal peoples who live either in the Greater Toronto Region or elsewhere in Canada. and beyond. We honor their courageous leaders of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So this brings us back to some of the technical difficulties that individuals have been experiencing. And what we're hoping to is that due to some of the technical difficulties as a result of the webinar platform itself, which again is sort of falls outside of our wheelhouse, I'm going to ask that people put up their hands on their control panel, and I will go through them to see what the issue is. So I'll start from the top of my list. Tammy, where did you go, Tammy? Okay, Charlene, your hand's up.
Yep.
You good to go?
Yep.
All right, thank you very much, Charlene. Thank you for your patience.
You're welcome.
Jackie, your hand's up.
Yes, good to go.
Awesome. Thank you again so much for your patience with this. Tammy,
Yes,
good to go?
yes, I'm good to go.
Thank you. Melanie Ann, Melanie?
I think we thought that you said that we should put our hands up if we were not having a problem. So I think that's what happened.
Honestly, I'm a little disheveled right now with this whole platform business, to be honest. So just trying to work through it. Thank you. Okay, so I won't go through everything. Thanks, Tammy, for that clarification. It definitely makes my life a little bit easier in not having to go through everything.
Okay.
For those that, again, are having difficulty, I do apologize. It is out of my control at this point, and we will be providing recordings. So I'm just letting everybody know that within the question box. And let's get this party started. Whew, here we go. So part of the rules of engagement during the course of our time together, in the hopes of trying to lessen some of the technical difficulties, we have your control panel that's located here, and there's a microphone. And for the purpose of sort of background noise, all of you have been coming into the room muted intentionally. And though if you do request the microphone at any time, do raise your hand or pose a question in the chat, and my colleague who is monitoring the background will be able to figure out what it is that you need. And if you want the mic, we will unmute you. So right now we've got Jasmeet. Jasmeet, your hand's up. Is everything okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. Thank you so very much. There's also presentation handouts for you to have as references after the webinar has concluded. Do please download them during the course of the presentation. They will not necessarily be accessible afterwards unless you request it from me directly. So just so everybody's aware of that. So when we're talking about mental wellness during pandemic and being able to support our students during this particular time, it really is trying to reestablish some of the basic level of understanding, not only for our own mental wellness, but when we are trying to have conversations and offer support for students, that different perspective. So we find ourselves in a very unprecedented time. However, it has allowed us the much needed time to take an inventory on how things have been going, and it provides us the opportunity to recalibrate the various roles we actually have to manage, and really even a deeper appreciation for some of the experiences that our students might be having and how they're reacting to those experiences. So we need to identify the overall health impact. And when we're talking about health, we're talking about it in two buckets. We're talking with regards to our physical health, which quite commonly, regardless of what culture a student is from or even the age, there is an understanding of what physical health is, and that's how our bodies are. It's having a healthy body is important. It's keeping fit and doing everything that we need to do in order to achieve that status of physical health. We're also taught at a very young age that our body gives us cues as to, how healthy or unhealthy our body might be feeling. And we listen to those cues and take action to eliminate the chances of us becoming more ill. So for example, when we're sick with, a stuffy nose or an upset tummy or things of that nature, we're told that that's a sign that we need to take action. Unfortunately, we find ourselves where our mental health isn't necessarily given the same attention. And it's very important that we start sort of changing the trajectory of that and really realign understanding of what mental health is, and maybe even taking it a step further and not really labeling it as mental health, but more as mental wellness. So when we are well, we are in our best form. So mental health is with regards to how our minds are. So that's our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and our behaviors. Having a healthy mind is as important as having a healthy body. They have a very close relationship. So overall basic understanding and sort of basic tools, if you will, in keeping our mental health in a positive light is to do the same things that our bodies need to keep healthy, our minds need to keep healthy. But what we find ourselves right now is in a situation where that mental health continuum that we all reside on and sort of shift through depending on how we respond and how we feel about different situations and different events has been actually really challenged during this particular time of disruption. And we can blame it on uncertainty, and that is something that we're going to be talking about. And though I'm going to sort of plant the seed right now, is that on a daily basis, the only certain thing that does happen is uncertainty. There are so many different variables and so many different factors that contribute to how something's going to play out. There's different variables, different experiences that contribute to what we think about a situation and how we feel about it. Those are uncertain because we don't necessarily know that they're coming. And due to COVID and other pandemics, frankly, it is a real strain and sort of jumpstart, if you will, to anxiety and stress levels intensifying as a result of that uncertainty. So when we're looking at mental health speaks to a very similar experience to that of physical health, and that is on a continuum. We never are in a same position on that continuum for forever or even for long periods of time. We shift along the continuum depending on those external factors, depending on internal factors, and we have to sort of keep our minds at the forefront of understanding that. So not only is it an understanding for ourselves, but more importantly, it's an understanding for our students and how to better support them. When we are looking at the continuum, I want to bring your attention to the icon that I've sort of, or the image that I've displayed here with that meter that looks at dark green and sort of transitions to the red area. Green, I would, determine is an excelling state of mental well-being. This is where, frankly, it is just an uncommon area to be in for a long particular time. This is beyond the normal spectrum. This is like everything's hunky-dory. Every aspect of your life is great. It's awesome. There's no conflict. There's no distress. Everything is just even keel, peachy keen. Doesn't exist. It's absolute perfection, and perfection is not reality. So that light green area on that meter really highlights where we all tend to hover. And this is where I identify a more thriving or healthy mental state. So this is normal mood fluctuations. It is being in control of those thoughts and not allowing the thoughts to control us. There's few sleep disturbances, there's few impacts, but you sort of take things in stride. And it's actually during the state of light green and thriving that you don't necessarily need to equip yourself with coping mechanisms or even tools or strategies. You're better able to just talk yourself through the process and manage that. The yellow is unsettled. This is more of a reacting stage amongst the continuum. So this is where feelings do tend to drive a lot of reactive behaviors. We become irritable, we become nervous, we tend to procrastinate, even a sense of overwhelm. So when COVID-19 was first introduced and experienced, this is where we found a lot of people to sort of reside in when it came to their mental wellness. It was this unsettled type of standpoint of, I'm concerned, I'm a bit nervous, but it's not too close to me or too directly impacting me that I'm still okay. Whatever happens across the water happens, and I can focus here. When we started seeing cases popping up within Canada and having some disruption to our routines and what we've been accustomed to, that's where we started to fall within that orange, and that's more of an injured or struggling state. So when we're looking at stress, stress is really the breeding ground of what everyone is experiencing with regards to that shift of struggling to even potentially in crisis. And fear in any situation has a purpose. We have to be able to identify what that purpose is. And when we're looking at fear in this particular situation of pandemics and COVID and trying to manage and support the mental wellness, not only of ourselves, but of our students, it is the fear of an unmet need or expectation. So the stress is the body's warning alarm to tell us to take acts of precaution. We don't always necessarily know what the best course of action is, and that's where we do tend to see more reactive behavior versus responsive behavior, and we'll talk about that on the next screen. So when we're trying to support our own mental wellness and that of our students, it's really identifying what their automatic pilot is. And really that's how we and how our mental wellness state is on a normal level of experience. So I've introduced you to the idea of responsive versus reactive behavior. And there is a very clear indicator as to that difference. So it's normal to have feelings like anger, sadness, stress, overwhelm when faced with challenges. We face challenges on a daily basis in various experiences for various reasons. And we try to come up with ways to cope. Some coping strategies are more effective than others. And that sort of builds us this inventory of tools that we can always go back into when we're faced with a new experience that has made us feel the same way. During times right now, such as the COVID-19 disruptions and sort of shifting gears a little bit as to not only our social lives, but our, familiar routines, it has thrown us into what is unfamiliar and uncomfortable. And that's where it really sort of intensifies those stress levels. And it affects our thoughts, it affects our feelings, and it really affects how we see the world, decreasing our ability to cope with the challenges of everyday life. So the image here on your screen symbolizes your automatic pilot. It sort of symbolizes how we as humans interpret various situations and then in turn outwardly behave. So it always starts with a thought. Now, it's very hard to know what someone else is thinking if they're not sharing it. But those thoughts, if we have this understanding, it allows us to better navigate the type of support that our students might be needing from us. So we've got, those thoughts that create very specific feelings, and those feelings become our truth. So there's no rhyme or reason necessarily that two people are going to necessarily feel the same thing about the same particular event, because it does start with the thought that each individual has. Those feelings then create very specific behaviors. So that is the outward responses that are being given. Those behaviors then reinforce the thoughts. And when we're talking about that automatic pilot in trying to better manage mental wellness, what we're wanting to achieve is that when we are able to identify what the feelings are, we are better able to stay in good mental health, because the behavior that we choose to outwardly exhibit will be more responsive versus reactive, because we're taking that pause to identify what that thought is, because we want to reinforce a different thought. And to do that, you have to behave differently. So I've said that fear and stress sort of has a purpose. And once we accept it and recognize what we're actually reacting towards, it serves to alert us to take action. And what we're wanting to do is take action in moving ourselves forward in a more healthy and positive way versus a reactive way that can tend to not necessarily be as productive. So I'm seeing some hands again. So I'm just going to go through those to see if there's any areas of concern that we need to address before moving on to the next piece. Jasmeet, your hand is up. Is everything okay? Do you have a question?
No, ma'am, my hand is down, lower hand.
Okay, thank you. Anut, your hand is up. I'm going to ask that you use the question box, which I'm going into now. And if it is an audio concern, then we can sort of address that. So I'm going to sort of scroll down. Joanne, if I can find your name. There's a lot of you in the room. Thank you so much for joining us. Jessie, can you unmute her, please? Joanne, you're self-muted. So are you able to unmute yourself and we can give you control to ask the question that you have? So Joanne?
Can you hear me now?
I can. Hello.
I'm just wondering, like, you're referencing handouts while you're talking, and I'm just wondering, where exactly do you see these, or where do you find these? Like,
no problem. Yeah. So so there is within your control panel, there's like the gray sort of toolbar.
This is more.
So there is more, and there should be handouts within that. And if not, then we can definitely send.
So there's 3 handouts: the mental health self-care wheel.
There is, ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's 2 others. Are those you're referring to?
Yes. So all of those are handouts that will be good references once we've concluded the webinar, just so you have ongoing support.
So that's what you're talking about as
yes,
you're speaking then. Okay. Okay, awesome.
Okay, thank you. So, so when we're talking about this automatic pilot, we all have it. It's just a matter of it's different for each individual. So when we have an understanding that we all respond differently to the same situation, we have a bit more of compassion and appreciation for how we can possibly support another individual. When we're talking about stress and when we're talking about anxiety, which is really at the core of what people are feeling during this particular time and some of the challenges that are triggering different experiences with regards to mental wellness, we need to also appreciate that the body, mind, behavior, and emotions all have different reactions and responses to how stress and anxiety actually feel like for the individual. So I have sort of given you a little snapshot as to the different signs and symptoms that can be evident with heightened and intensified areas of stress and anxiety within each of those components. So what we tend to see more commonly, especially during this time, which has been reported and sort of identified amongst some of the clients I work with, is with regards to emotions of sadness or confusion, irritability, uneasiness, possibly a sense of overwhelm or frustration, reduced concentration. There's a lot of different perspectives and different impacts that this pandemic has has caused for so many people. And for a lot of us, not only has it been transitioning two worlds and colliding them into one, which is very uncommon and very concerning for so many people, it has also really challenged some of the expectations that people have had about various experiences. So with our students, for example, a lot of their reactive behavior and emotions, or even demands, frankly, on you for having answers to their questions and having a backup plan and having all of these different things, is their way of saying, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know how to handle this. And while it's coming across quite aggressive, or even quite alarming and concerning for you, it's really important to understand that that is their reaction. And what we need to do first and foremost, before even providing them support, is identify what are we able to do within our own mental wellness to take charge of that, so we can actually provide them some strategies in return that can be heard, for one, but more importantly, applied. So taking charge of your mental wellness is that first step within supporting your students. So we've all might have heard, the analogy of put your oxygen mask on first before putting one on your child. And the point that this is trying to make is that we are useless to anyone else if we are not functioning properly ourselves. So we do need to look at our own stress levels, our own mental wellness during this particular experience of disruption, which is quite unique and unprecedented, before we can actually support anyone else. And more importantly, that includes our students. So the 4 A's to taking charge of stress is that starting point of understanding and having that awareness. I introduced you to that concept of stress being able to be the response to a fear, right? And when we're looking at particular situations that are triggering those feelings of stress and igniting that intense sense of anxiety, which is worry and nervousness, we may not be able to apply one of these A's. So it's really identifying which A of this formula are you able to apply to a situation effectively, so we can lessen the stress level. So the first one is avoid. And that is, believe it or not, you simply just avoid the stress that's being caused. And that can be difficult at this time, 100%. So the first step is changing behavior, is understanding what is maintaining the behavior in the first place. So really, again, identifying that feeling or the core of that feeling, what's igniting it, what is the actual fear that has triggered this stress level. And that's a question that you can ask the student and sort of explore with them. What is that stress about? Well, I can't graduate, but what is the stress right now? And try to minimize it into the current situation versus the bigger picture. We want small morsels versus too much information. Then there's altering, there's accepting, and then there's adapting. Now, every day in our personal lives and professional lives, we face challenges. We face decisions and situations that cause our stress levels to escalate. The ability to step back and take a different view is really a crucial skill for this time. So carrying negative viewpoints or carrying all these concerns about what's to come in 6 months, what's to come in 3 months, and all of this uncertainty, because there's no answers that frankly anyone has, and we're all in the same boat in trying to improvise and navigate our new norm. We need to take a step back and really look at how can we change our perspective. Because when it comes to perception, perception becomes our reality. And perceptions are influenced by a number of factors. They're influenced by experience. They're influenced by personal values and judgments, information, as well as lack of information, and our needs and desires. So when we are looking at trying to expand and shift that perception and try to work with a student to shift that perception, what we're trying to do is provide them an opportunity to trick their mind. Because right now, what they're feeling and how they are behaving is a result of the thought that has started in their mind. So we need to trick the mind and sort of flip the script as to what we are all thinking in order to feel something different, in order to be able to respond rather than react. So here's a few different steps that you can do with regards to flipping the script. That is provided in one of your handouts in more detail, including other anecdotes as well when it comes to shifting some of those mind and distorted thinking thoughts. Another flipping the script is a matter of looking at this situation, not about the uncertainty around it, while that is a reality and that is something to be concerned about. It's focusing on the positive, and it's really looking at what we can do in order to identify those moments of smiles or those moments of positivity or the opportunities that this particular disruption and the unique situations we find ourselves in are actually providing. So there's the rose check-in. And while, yes, our brains are really wired to look for the negative, it does speak to the reliance that our existence has had on seeing all the dangers around. That's sort of how we've survived, is we've identified where the dangers are so we know what to do to take action to protect. We're not in a situation right now with regards to needing to protect. We're just needing to understand and come up with a game plan. So hi, Carmen. I'm trying to unmute you. Your hand is up. So if you are self-muted, there you go, Carmen. How's it going? Hello, Carmen.
Good, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Do you have a question?
You know what? I just wanted, maybe at the end, or I'm not sure, but just to kind of go over more of the 4 A's. So you just kind of gave us like an example of the avoid. An example for that would be like, what is your stress right now? So just kind of go over the 4 A's.
I can definitely do that. Of course.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, please. So this is all about learning, people. So whatever you guys need. So when we look at, the avoid, which we talked about, right? So sometimes it's also about taking control of your surroundings. Avoid people who bother you. Those are things that you can avoid if it's causing you the stress. If there's other aspects that you have or responsibilities that are causing you stress, you can say no and sort of learn to introduce that into your vocabulary, which I think in our professions is very hard to do because we don't think that we're necessarily fulfilling our obligations if we say no. But it's really about maintaining our own boundaries in order to lessen those stress levels from increasing. With regards to altering, so one of the most helpful things to do during this time is take an inventory, then attempt to change your situation for the better, right? So we want to alter in the sense of maybe you're not one to necessarily communicate your feelings openly, or even you communicate your feelings openly with colleagues or students because you want to respect sort of this clarity of boundaries between. And though feelings make you human, and feelings allow you to express where your non-negotiables are and sort of where your perception is. Managing your time better can be an alter to take charge of stress. Setting limits in advance can be an example of altering and taking charge of stress. Acceptance is a little bit more challenging. That takes that takes skill in itself. But acceptance really is that perception shift. We want to accept that there is really aspects within the situation that are out of our control. And when we accept that we may have no choice but to just take things as they are and take things day by day to see how information is revealed, what we learn on a day-to-day basis to help shift that perception, we're able to really accept that the situation and the stress level that we are experiencing is just part of the experience. The adapting is where, thinking you can't cope is one of the great stressors. Thinking that we're never going to get to a normal before. Thinking all the worst case scenarios is really where the increased levels of stress actually occur. And for our student population, imagine what those worst case scenarios can possibly be, or simply ask them what they're thinking of, like what is the cause of their stress. And if they are these large, distorted, sort of more catastrophizing type of thinking, then we need to look at adapting those particular thoughts. And that's why adapting, does involve changing those expectations as well, having different standards as to what this experience is going to be. The reality is things have changed. Responsibilities have changed. Way of doing things and interacting have changed. We can't expect a similar performance or a similar expectation of us or of our students when the normal is no longer what was familiar. We're creating a new dynamic, and that is just adapting and adjusting to the standards in which we find ourselves in. So we want to also look at, again, that perception shifting in reframing even the issue. Try looking at the situation from a different viewpoint. Instead of feeling frustrated, look at the opportunities that it presents itself at the time. So I hope that gave you a little bit more perspective on those A's. And what I've done is sort of taken it a step further and really highlighting the acceptance as well as the adaptation in order to generate some thought of tools that you can have with conversations with students. So the perspective shift is a strategy and a conversation that you can have with students to help them accept the uncertainty, accept that there's going to be answers you don't have, accept that there's going to be answers that no one's really going to have for a little bit of time, because we are still learning more about this virus, and we're still learning more about the disruption that it's causing and the new routines and rhythms that we have to get into. The idea, though, in not only the perspective shift, but the Rose check-in here is really, again, identifying that we can change that negative thought that we are starting with in order to feel more positive and not feel as drained or as overwhelmed or as stressed or as fearful, whatever that emotion is that has been generated and created because of that thought, by looking at it differently. The Rose check-in provides the individuals to identify, okay, what's going well in your life? Like, what is actually happening that you can be proud of or that you can be happy of? Look at the rosebud, which is the opportunity. Amongst the disruption, while I've been accustomed to working from home in my role, the disruption has really provided the platform for not only myself, but GuardMe to provide additional support to not only our partners, but to the educational world, frankly, in saying we're still here for you by providing these webinars. Hopefully we'll get the technological piece down a little bit easier. But it's the idea of what are the opportunities that have been presented and really focusing on that and modeling that for our students, encouraging them to do the same will definitely shift the trajectory a little bit. Now, going through some additional tips, and it's more of looking at it from those different perspectives. And that is, one and foremost, is understanding your anxiety. So when we're talking about anxiety, that is the actual feeling of worry, the feeling of uneasiness. It's just labeled anxiety. It is a natural bodily experience that we all have regardless of a situation. And though during times of pandemic and now, it definitely is intensified. So it is the uncertainty surrounding the virus that is most difficult thing to manage. We sort of go through in wanting to have information so we know how to respond, we know how to control or even manipulate a particular outcome of an event. And with regards to COVID-19, that's just not possible. And that's where we have the most challenging time to accept, or that our students have to accept. They had a certain blueprint of what their educational experience it was going to be, or what your role is towards them, or what roles colleagues have of you and expectations. Well, now this has totally been blank slated, and we're working from a new type of recipe, if you will, and we get to fill in what those ingredients are, and those ingredients are for success. So staying informed is going to be really important, because when we are having conversations or needing to share information, we want to ensure that it's from a trustworthy source and factual, not based on our opinions or based on our perception. So we'll provide you some resources at the end of different websites that are accessible to you that have that trustworthy information. Other aspects is with regards to focusing on things that you can control and sort of releasing what you can't. So there's that practice of acceptance and understanding that certain things are just not within our grasp to manipulate or have an impact on. We can't control other people's actions. We can't control how long this is going to last. We can't predict what's going to happen next. Those are something that in the deck of cards that we've been handed due to COVID, we just don't have the transparency behind or even clues. They're still revealing themselves on an ongoing basis. So we have to look at what we can control, and that's our own attitudes, our own kindness and compassion, and everything else that I've included here on the list for you. The key really when it comes to managing some of the distress and looking at how we can, walk a student through their overwhelm and their experience of the situation is focusing on specific things that can be changed rather than circumstances that can't. So planning for what you can. So it's, definitely natural to be concerned with regards to the what's going to happen, the what ifs. And it's about being proactive to help lessen the anxiety and not thinking ahead to intensify the anxiety. And there's a way to sort of dictate the trajectory of that in order to lessen the anxiety and sort of still fulfill that need of what's going to happen next and have a plan. You want to start off by encouraging either yourself or encouraging the student to write down the specific worries. What exactly are they worried about with regards to how the virus is going to disrupt their life or how they are, experiencing disruption now? Then it's about identifying and listing possible solutions that they can think of to fulfill and alleviate some of that worry. And then coming up with an action plan for each of those options. And when we're talking about action plans, it's what needs to happen, what steps need to be put in place in order to fulfill that solution and actually lessen the stress and anxiety that the individual might be feeling. Once that action plan has been established, that list is then put away. It's set aside and it's not revisited, because what we don't want to do is sit in the what ifs for too long, because it just fuels and really puts flame on the, to that negative thought. An idea of how to stop the what ifs from taking control, I've included here is a grounding technique called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the idea of trying not to allow your thoughts to control you, but controlling your thoughts, is to reignite that rational and balanced brain that we have. When the thoughts keep on going, what happens, it sort of puts a spoke in the wheel, if you will, and doesn't allow it to spin. And what we need to happen is we need our rational brain accessible in order to plan, in order to think, in order to strategize. And when it's clustered up with negative thoughts, we actually can't really effectively think and problem solve without having that emotion take over. Other techniques are also included in that powerful anecdote handout that has been provided within the control panel that I do encourage you to download. We've heard a lot about the importance of staying connected, and there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of tips that have been provided with regards to that. Social distancing does come with its own risks. We as humans are social creatures. We're hardwired to seek and need connection. So being isolated definitely has a negative impact and can have a negative impact. And when we even look at some of our students, they are either away from home or they really look at their school experience as that social interaction that they so desire and they so need. So when we have sort of put a stop to what they've been accustomed to achieve that type of connection, they don't know necessarily how to cope. And that's when the mental health spectrum meter changes. So we want to encourage different opportunities for them to connect, and maybe even ourselves put together a social group online or things of that nature to really provide students and provide others a platform to connect with others in a creative way. We also can't take away the importance of intentional self-care, and also helping others is equally important. And that sort of leads us into supporting our students more specifically. So as human beings, as I said, we are programmed, to be very social creatures. We are programmed to be part of a group. So we need to develop and consistently exercise our ability to remain part of a community. We seek connection. Individuals must confront and cope with their fears while at the same time looking at their own and others' safety remotely. That's a lot to take on, and that's a lot to sort of work through. And that's why individuals tend to be very reactive in their behavior versus responsive. It's also why a lot of individuals are having a difficult time focusing on the now or even a short-term period, and they become consumed with long-term focus and goals, which can also be quite overwhelming. So with support creates change. So when we are trying to offer our students support and be available to them and provide them guidance or even some perspective shifting with regards to their experience, it's about listening to understand and not to reply. And there's a big difference between the two. When we are engaged in conversation with someone with the intention to come up with a response because we feel that we have to, we actually are not listening to understand that person's perspective and really hear what they are trying to communicate to us. And it's in that communication that we can identify what the student is actually needing. The first step of changing any behavior is to understand what is maintaining that behavior in the first place. So if we are not listening to understand what is the student actually feeling to better understand what their need is, then we're really not effectively supporting them. We need to set new expectations and establish new and clear boundaries as to what the relationship dynamic is currently because of disruption. And this is also a fair point to introduce into your households as well, for your own mental wellness. Identify what your students' coping skills are. Are they present focused? Are they looking at, again, that down the road as to what's going to happen next, what's happening to, all of these long-term type of scenarios. So how can we sort of gear them more towards short-term focused and present focused type of coping? That is also identifying what your students' self-care needs are. What are their self-care habits? We do find ourselves in the situation that, when it comes to self-care, that is a practice that often is established at a very young age because of family and cultural backgrounds. So we'll talk a little bit about that, just more of a highlighted point. And then you want to help that student create a self-care plan. Now, some students' perception of what self-care actually is can be quite limited. And that's why one of those handouts is that self-care wheel, because that could be a talking point or a starting point of conversation. We need to understand as well that with the change and the disruption that has happened, there's not going to be the same performance. There's not going to be the same level of interaction that you're going to have with them, or that you're going to have with others, or that they're going to have with you. So when we're setting clear expectations, we're really setting these as rules, if you will, rules of engagement. And those rules need to be very clearly defined and enforced, not only for yourself, for your colleagues, for your children at home if you have them, or other family members, and more importantly for your students, in order to not only support your own mental well-being, but also to support theirs. It's really important to remember that this isn't a personal situation. While sometimes we feel that it is, it's a community issue. And we need to convey this in a very tactful yet straightforward way. And this could be with regards to making it very clear to the students, to family members, to colleagues, that while you were readily available prior to COVID, You might be also in a situation where you're managing a household, you're managing children as well as a work life. So that balance requires a lot of your attention and frankly, strategic scheduling. So you may not necessarily be as readily available. You set the expectations right off the bat, but you also have to enforce them. I encourage you to consider how you yourself are modeling positive mental health. Consider what you are showing. Get support for yourself if you become, a little concerned or overwhelmed and you want to become as grounded as possible. So look at what type of support you require in order to fulfill that need. Allow the individual to express their needs and wants as well, and relay them back. I've highlighted here again that socialization takes place through interaction with many individuals, groups, and social institutions such as schools. Students don't have that anymore. So this can cause in itself a very high, intense level of anxiety and worry or even anger as to this type of disruption, because we value socialization and interaction so highly in order to further develop our own selves and our own identity. Encourage remote socialization, and again, coming up with ideas as to how they can actually achieve that. And there's different ways through video chats, there's different ways through technological platforms in order to adapt that socialization in a more remote type of format. Now, we can all appreciate and identify that new routines are something that we have all tried to establish and that some of us may still be establishing. And though I caution us in striving for perfection or striving for a complete transference of what was familiar to us before to what we are experiencing right now, it's just an unrealistic expectation. And what that is striving for is perfection. What we need to do is establish a routine of just regiment and slotting in and really establishing those various boundaries, because it is through chaos and it is through just not having that structure that actually is more anxiety provoking for individuals. So it really is coming up with that fine schedule and letting everyone that you do have or need interactions with to actually respect and follow through. That is also something that you can encourage students to do. And this is where these simple tips can be applied and shared with anyone. So amidst the unique disruption, individuals of all ages have been forced to adjust to this new rhythm, a new routine of school, at work, at home. This new normal has triggered a much broader variety of emotions in all of those impacted. And some simple tips, such as the ones here, can really help to adjust and establish those new routines that will support our well-being and ways to keep ourselves, our students, and even our communities empowered, nourished, and supported as well. So if it is the case where, there's other individuals in the home, designate a specific work area as your work zone and use it consistently. Set clear expectations and boundaries. Find ways to spend your time. Structure everything. Schedule in everything. Schedule in meal time, wake up time, family time, me time. Really identify and get in tune with your own personal awareness of what limits are. So what does your stress feel like and how is your stress changing? Paying attention to what coping mechanisms you have or really what it is you might need to put in place. Limit consumption of news, but stay informed. It's important as well for the mind to be stimulated. So if, it is the case where there's not a lot of engagement for students and yet more of preoccupation, they're not going to have their mind stimulated. And that's going to be a harder transition for them during this particular time. It's encouraging activity and staying physically active. It's encouraging practicing intentional self-care and the connection with others. And then it's also about reaching out for support when needed, and that includes yourselves. So resources that are available for support, I sort of bucket them into two. I've included some mental health and well-being free apps that are available. that look at really identifying different mental health coping mechanisms, but more specifically with regards to even anxiety and stress. There's a body scan meditation if that's of interest. There's also with regards to actual mental health and wellness support from professionals that are accessible. There's local hotlines and distress lines. There is with regards to free online support groups that can also be available regardless of where the child or the student resides. There's Kids Help Phone, that is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week telephone counseling support for individuals up to the age of 20, regardless of what province they reside or regardless of where they are from. And then there is the Keep Me Safe by GuardMe student support program. But this program is, while 24-hour counseling support, it is only available to eligible students. And what that means is that if the Keep Me Safe program or the MySSP program was available to the students prior to COVID-19 disruption, it is still available to them. If you yourself are in a position where you'd like to inquire more about the Keep Me Safe program, if your school does not have it, please do send a quick email to inquiries@keepmesafe.org for more information and guidance as to the next steps if you wish to introduce this program to your student population. Here are various websites that can also be a great tool and resource for that accurate and factual information on COVID-19. So please do direct individuals to these particular websites and not social media or other even news agents as a means of that provider of information, because it's not always accurate. And I'm not trying to copy the fake news. That's not what I'm saying. It's based on perception and based on highlights. And what you want to do is really allow the students as well as yourself to siphon through all of the facts and not just some of the facts. So I've encouraged and sort of highlighted that part of the first step in really managing mental wellness during pandemic is perspective shifting. And this I've shared here is my perspective shift in what I've sort of adopted as sort of my mantra to try to work through some of the overwhelm and concerns that I have, even personally. So my perspective shift is growth requires patience, solitude, and sacrifice. We can't ignore growth calling. Growth will communicate through you by creating shifts in your life that will leave you with no option but to adapt. Choose to rewrite the script. Choose to embark in a new journey. Choose to embrace a new perspective. Some change is needed during this unique time. It is clear to us that collectively, the efforts of provinces, territories, education associations, and institutions, as well as each of us individually, can put Canada's educational system back on the path of moving forward and looking forward to new opportunities. So whatever your life's pursuits, I hope that your new perspective will help you win some victories for humanity in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. The webinar recording will be available as well as additional webinars coming up. If you have any questions pertaining to today's webinar or concerns, do send me an email directly and we'll try to figure that out. I again apologize profusely for the technological difficulties that people have experienced today, and we will work through those. It's a matter of flexibility and adaptability during this particular time. I will open the floor to additional questions and sort of go through what some of those questions might be that might not have necessarily been answered during the course of our time together. And if there are no questions, I want you all to stay safe, healthy, connected, and please stay positive. So I open the floor to questions if there are any. And I see some hands, so I will do my best to go through the list. So Eddie, I see your hand is up. I've unmuted you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you for the talk. You were talking about stress levels. Some of our students would love for us to stop all evaluations. We have chosen to keep them as light as we could. Of course, we're gonna delete all the evaluations, but do you have insight to share as to what kind of stress can evaluations in this context? What do you think are the key components of this specific stress relating to evaluations? We are going to keep them, but if I can get insight as to how we can explain the fact that it's not punishment, it's evaluations.
Well, and I think that part of it is, again, an association that has been made with regards to evaluations, to be honest. I strongly encourage them. I'm actually not a proponent of not having any form of evaluation or even consequences. I taught for 20 years before I actually went into counseling. So I'm not a stranger to some of the battles that students do get into with teachers and administrators with regards to grades and trying to have that. One thing that we need to appreciate is what that provides us. And what it provides us is the ability that not everything comes without work. And we want to look at the evaluations, or really it's providing them feedback. And that's how I would actually present it, as we're just providing you feedback on furthering developing your skills, on furthering developing your knowledge, and really establishing where you are at. It's not about good or bad. And that has been an inherited perception that a lot of students have had. And that just speaks to, one, the generation that we are working with and the age of entitlement, frankly, that we are just so fearful of children experiencing those type of emotions rather than actually providing them tools to manage those emotions. Because the reality is, as well, is that stress exists, and in everything that we do, even as adults in occupation, does have some form of critique and feedback and some evaluation. And that is reflected in our job performances. So if we sort of provide a framework that allows that growth to happen, and it really starts at a younger age, to be honest, it is harder to introduce that new perspective with some of the older generation, the older students, and though it still can be done. It's just a matter of navigating that conversation from the positive, and really shifting it from that negative type of thought process. So if the student is thinking it from a negative perspective, then what we want to do is reframe it in what that positive is actually providing it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Jasmeet, your hand is up. I've unmuted you. Hello? I guess not. Okay. Are there any other questions that I haven't addressed? I'm sort of going through the question box in the hopes of a lot of those questions in there is with regards to audio. And again, I sincerely apologize. So I am mindful of everybody's time. And again, just the delay in getting started with all of the technical difficulties. So I do appreciate the patience that everyone did have. Again, we do find ourselves all in the same position of needing to sort of improvise, adjust, and really be compassionate and flexible. So I do thank you all. We will be providing everyone a link of the recording, which can be found on our website, but also it is found within the webinar calendar handout that you have within your control panel. So before I end today's webinar, please do download those handouts from your control panel during the course of this presentation. Hi, Monique. I've unmuted you. Do you have a question?
Monique, thank you. I'm not seeing where this the gray
handout?
bar is down. Yeah.
So
I've emailed as well to request it.
perfect. So then I will definitely send it your way.
Yes. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, it's probably
Jesse,
easier that
or
way.
Are you Christine? Because the email came from Christine, I believe, or Christina.
It should be Christina. Yeah, that's my email address. So it should be Christina@keepmesafe.org.
Perfect. That's where I emailed them.
Perfect.
Thank you.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, Monique, so much for being so patient. Shahik, if I pronounced that right, I'm sorry, I've unmuted you. Shahik Ahmad? Well, thank you, everyone, and it has been an absolute pleasure. We will follow up. And again, if you do require any assistance with regards to questions or answers or anything else with regards to today's webinar or others, please don't hesitate to send me a quick email, Christina@keepmesafe.org. For now, take care.